Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I am reviewing A Time of Dread. This is book 1 of the trilogy of Blood and Bone by John Gwynne. And I have a little story to tell you guys. Some of you might have seen me mention this in a community post, but I was reading along in A Time of Dread and enjoying myself very much when suddenly I saw something odd. And here I'll show you. The camera will probably pick that up. You can see probably that there are some missing pages. It goes from page 178 to 211. Imagine my horror when I realized that there were 32 missing pages. And I was a little bit upset. A Time of Dread became a time of annoyance there for a little while. And I was upset mostly, though, because I am going to be doing a collaborative discussion of A Time of Dread with some of my fellow booktubers, something very similar to what we were doing before with The Faithful and the Fallen. And so I needed to read this book. I actually had to email my friends and my fellow booktubers and let them know, look guys, I had to get a replacement copy. It's going to take about a week. I'm afraid we're going to have to delay our discussion a bit. But as it turned out, BookTube is a place full of wonderful people, and one of my fellow booktubers sent me the missing pages, took the time to take pictures of each one and send me them in an email, and I was able to read the missing pages. So thank you, Alan. Alan from the Library of Alexandria turned out to be the hero in this case. Here comes the cavalry, Alan, so thank you very much. So Alan has made this possible, and so I'm very happy to be reviewing the book more or less on schedule. So that's my little story. And as I said, well, I'll be in a collaborative discussion. So this review is going to be spoiler-free. I'm going to let out the spoilers when I appear with my fellow booktubers on Alex Nieves' channel when we do our discussion later this month, or actually I think in mid-July. So anyway, I enjoyed, as I was saying, A Time of Dread very much. It is about 130 years or so after the end of The Faithful and the Fallen. And I would recommend to anyone thinking about reading A Time of Dread who hasn't read The Faithful and the Fallen to read The Faithful and the Fallen first. It is not necessary. You can absolutely pick up a Blood and Bone without having read The Faithful and the Fallen. However, I have a few reasons why I would just argue that it's probably a little bit better to read The Faithful and the Fallen first. First of all, there is a huge spoiler in A Time of Dread for the ending of The Faithful and the Fallen. So you will know how The Faithful and the Fallen ends if you read the beginning of this A Blood and Bone trilogy. Another reason is that if you come into A Time of Dread having read The Faithful and the Fallen, you'll be very familiar with the world. John Gwynne does a lot of world building, especially in the first book of The Faithful and the Fallen, Malice. So there's, I think, a degree to which you will appreciate having gone through The Faithful and the Fallen, being familiar with the world. You'll be able to hit the ground running when you start A Blood and Bone. And thirdly, there are these really nostalgic references to The Faithful and the Fallen that won't hit you quite as much if you haven't read it first, if you just go right into A Blood and Bone. So, you know, those are not necessary things to consider, but for me, it's enough. But you certainly could, if you wanted to, just go right into A Time of Dread. So that said, I want to say that so far, my favorite book by Gwynne remains his latest one, The Shadow of the Gods. And this is, that's the first book of the Bloodsworn trilogy. This is the ongoing trilogy that he's writing now, which is set in a different world. It is not in the same world as The Faithful and the Fallen and A Time of Dread or Blood and Bone, which all take place in the Banished Lands. So, but I will say that Gwynne fans, I would expect most Gwynne fans to really enjoy A Time of Dread. It is very familiar in terms of the action and in terms of the pacing. There's really well orchestrated battle and combat scenes, and there's just a lot of wonderful animal companions and really vivid characters. So I think, as in his other work as well, Gwynne shows a willingness to kill off characters. So watch out. You know, there's this, he really does up the stakes by killing off certain characters that you will come to love, and you will be upset as you read these books. So, he really does keep it real that way, and that is something that I certainly appreciate, even though I'm a little bit scared at times for certain characters because of it. But, he really succeeds in delivering and giving you that sense of tension during this really fast-paced, action-packed read. So I would also say, though, that there is a difference. That Time of Dread is tonally a little bit different from The Faithful and the Fallen, in my opinion. And what I mean by that, it is grimmer. It is a bit bleaker. It is. It contains more of the grotesque and almost horror-like elements. It's not horror. It's still fantasy, of course, but I would say it's closer to horror than The Faithful and the Fallen is. And there is also an element of mystery in it. So there is that difference tonally. For me, it is a grimmer read so far. But we'll see if that holds up as I continue with the other two books in the trilogy. Another thing that I want to comment on, and this is also very non-spoiler, is some of the inspiration behind A Time of Dread that at least I felt was in there. And that has to do with the inspiration. I know from reading The Faithful and the Fallen and talking about it with John Gwynne and with Patrick Leo and others, that Milton was a big inspiration for John Gwynne when writing The Faithful and the Fallen. And I assume this continues to be the case because you have some of the same orders of beings in this trilogy. And a lot of that comes from this Milton influence. And I'm talking about the Ben Elim and the Kadashim. And it's interesting because I think what Gwynne has done here is he's taken some inspiration from the actual era, the historical era that Milton lived in, and which is a big part of that was the Commonwealth or the Interregnum, the period during which the Puritan element of society over in England successfully rebelled and took over for a period of years, and they were ruled by Oliver Cromwell for a while. And by no coincidence, I think, John Gwynne names the leader of the Ben Elim, who have taken over a broad part of the society of the Banished Lands, the Lord Protector, which is Oliver Cromwell's title. So there is a similar kind of intolerance, a similar kind of emphasis on purity and on moral certainty. And these lead to atrocities committed in the name of righteousness, in the name of God. This is a feature of the Commonwealth as we look back in history, and it seems to be a feature of the Ben Elim rule of the Banished Lands as well. So I found that to be a very interesting aspect of this, and that is also where Gwynne introduces some moral complexity into this story. There is some real grayness in here, which is I appreciate it very much. Though there are some characters who are clearly evil. You have the baddies in here; they are definitely baddies, and there's no doubt about it. The Kadashim and their minions are truly horrific and grotesque and scary, and they're very evil. But these the various opponents of evil in the story, the Ben Elim and the people that they have under them in this alliance that is centered in Drasil, as well as the people who belong to the Order of the Bright Star. So they have some failings, all these heroic characters. They have some failings, they have disagreements, and these are sometimes very costly failings. So this is something I think that Gwynne does very well in here. And I liked, for the most part, really loved the characters in here as well. I'll start with my favorite character. By the way, there are 4 main POV characters that we follow in A Time of Dread. And the one that I adored, the one that I love the most, is undoubtedly Drem. For me, Drem is the most 3-dimensional character in A Time of Dread. He was an absolutely compelling character. I love the complexity that John Gwynne has introduced with this character, and his relationship with his father is truly special, and I thought it was beautiful and very well sketched by Gwynne. And Gwynne has been very public and open about the fact that there are aspects of this character, Drem, that are based on one of his sons. And so that was also kind of touching to me. It really did make this a very special character. And then there is Sig. This is a character who actually, so the characters mostly, for the most part, the characters that you will see from A Faithful and the Fallen are long-lived ones. They belong to long-lived races such as the Benelim or the giants who live longer than us normal humans. So, so you have Sig, who was a minor character in The Faithful and the Fallen, who becomes a major POV character here. And wow, she's a great character. Very compelling, very cool character. I sometimes even wonder if she was an early inspiration for Orca in Gwynne's latest book, In the Shadow of the Gods. But yeah, Sig is a really fantastic, dynamic character. Absolutely loved her POV chapters. They all just kind of flew by. And then there's Bleda, who belongs to the society, the horse-oriented society to the east. These people remind me of the sort of the Mongolian steppes, and they're horse warriors who are very good with the bow. They can shoot from the horse, similar to the way that different cultures who came from the Mongolian steppes were, and when they met the European societies, they were superior in some senses from a military point of view because they were able to ride horses and shoot from the bow simultaneously. So it seems like Gwynne has based them, the people of Arconum, on those historical societies. And he's a great character. He is, for the most part, for most of the book, an outsider whose perspective is very telling and interesting because he can see things that other people can't see who are from within a given society. And he develops a very interesting relationship with one of the other characters in the story that I find compelling as well. And speaking of the other character, the last POV character is Riv, and I did enjoy her chapters too. She's a warrior who belongs to the human allies of the Benelim in Drasil and elsewhere in the parts of the Banished Lands that the Benelim have sort of taken over. And it's interesting to see her development just within a time of dread because she learned some things that really shake her worldview in some very compelling ways. So I really enjoyed all the POV characters and their development. There's some great stuff in there. Overall, I think this was a very strong addition to the Banished Lands for me, and I'm looking forward not only to continuing in this trilogy, but to talking to my fellow booktubers about it. So, and that's it for me for now. For this review, I'm going to keep to the non-spoilers, but I hope to see some of you in that discussion, which will be, I think, around mid-month on Alex Nieves' channel. Until next time.